Welcome to The Leaders Who Care, a podcast powered by Dynamis Group. We are here to give the stage and support to those committed to create a positive and lasting impact, way beyond the profits and margins, the leaders of the world who care for others and serve a bigger purpose. Join us on the journey of creating a better, more caring world. And now to your host, Marian Temelkov.
Hello everyone, I'm super excited for today's episode as we have a very special guest today with us. As you know, in the Leaders Who Care, we bring together leaders who care, and our mission is to discover, go out around the world and bring from every corner, every country, leaders who care, and give them a stage to share their experiences, share really their goodness of how they care and what is the impact they make. And today, we have an amazing leader that is joining us, the chairman of Buy1Give1, a serial entrepreneur with an impact and purpose, TEDx speaker, and not to mention many other titles. Paul, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. And by the way, everybody listening and joining us, thank you for being here too. Awesome to be here.
It is, thank you for making the time, and really we're so excited to have so many questions to ask you, but why don't we start with a brief introduction for people who haven't met you. Who is Paul, and tell us about Buy1Give1. I mean, this is certainly so exciting.
Well, and what's interesting, of course, is that I'm live here in Singapore. So in effect, I'm in the future right now, right? Because I'm actually 7 hours ahead of you. But let me just go back to the past. I look at all of the things that I've done, and you know, you're supposed to have this kind of hero's journey thing, you know.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a very different journey in the sense that I look back on it, and I just am so grateful for where I've been and all of the moments that contribute to now. A good friend of mine says, you know, where we are right now is a product essentially of all the moments that we've had leading up to now and how we've reacted to those. So my first moment when I took breath was actually in the United Kingdom. I was born down there in Dover, very close to Dover. Yeah, not too far away from where you guys are. And then I got headhunted. How lucky is this? You see, you'll follow the thread of luck. I got headhunted by Hewlett Packard way back before many of our listeners were born, I suspect. And I was one of the first 10 actually in Hewlett Packard in Australia.
Wow.
And, you know, yeah, so literally sitting and having breakfast with great leaders like, you know, Bill Hewlett, Dave Packard, and all of that. I mean, the impact that has on you is just amazing. And then, of course, I went on, as we frequently do, with that entrepreneurial seizure that Michael Gerber talks about. And I created one of Australia's first computer companies. And then I had a moment where I was actually in an audience. There were 600 people in the audience. And this was in the days before we even knew what a seminar was. And it was this guy. Some of us would know of him, the Jim Rohn, the late great Jim Rohn.
Oh, of course.
And yeah, and for me it was like one of these amazing experiences. It was almost like being in a tunnel, and I was him, and I saw that that was my thing, that I really wanted to be doing that, and to you know, to speak, to engage, to move, to inspire people around the world. And ever since that time, which is, when was that? 1981, actually, that was. And ever since that time, I've been very privileged to do that in various entities as we've gone along. Probably the one that many people would be familiar with is a thing I did called Results Corporation, where we were responsible for all of the driving of some 23,400 businesses.
Wow.
Then we flipped that into the accounting profession. And you might gather I'm not an accountant, but I love working with them because I think they change a lot of lives, even though they themselves don't realize it. And then one of those moments happened in 2007 Before that, in 2000, I'd sold everything. I'm supposed to go retire, but I'm not sure whether you get it in my voice, but retiring is not something that was meant for me, right? So, because there's that inherent curiosity, about how the world works, how we as individuals work, how we create impacts and all that kind of stuff. And then in 2007, that was perhaps the biggest moment where I met my co-founder of Buy1Give1. Her name is Masami Sato. And as you might gather from that name, she's this tiny little Japanese person who I was mentoring, actually. And you would know because you do a lot of this, right? And when you mentor people, you're in this privileged position of being the one that asks questions and the mentee is supposed to answer them, right? And I remember she came into this thing and it was obvious that she had been really in very deep thought for a long time. And she said, in this lovely Japanese accent, can we do today differently? And I said, sure we can. And she said, well, can I ask you a question? Sure you can. So she said, well, it's not so much a question, but I want you to imagine, and by the way, leaders have this ability, don't they, to turn imagination into reality. And she said, I want you to imagine a different world. And I said, like what? And she said, a world where every time business is done, something great happens in the world. Now, at the time, Marian, those that know me would call me, I hope this translates, they would call me, at that time, 2007, they would call me an Aussie bloke, okay? I was living in Australia. And Aussie blokes tend not to be too deep. So when she said that, I said, oh yeah, that'd be great. And she said, and she recognized that I didn't really get it. And she said, I don't think you quite get it. And I said, well, help me with that. And she said, well, I've called it at this point in this idea, I've called it Buy1Give1. And I said, well, how would that work? And she said, well, imagine you go down to a big electronics store and you buy a plasma TV. And I said, Masami, woo. If I go down to that big electronics store and buy a plasma TV, they're not going to give me, you called it Buy1Give, they're not going to give me another TV, right? And she said, no. She said, you completely misunderstand. I said, well, help me. She said, well, imagine when you go down there, well, the reason that you go down there is because you want better or bigger, but let's say better vision. That's why you go buy that TV. So she said, just imagine for a moment if when you did that, someone who could not see got the gift of sight. I went, oh my gosh, that is something else. And I remember at the time I had a cup of coffee in my hand, and she said, or imagine every time a cup of coffee is sold, that somebody in need gets access to pure life-saving water. And I was surrounded by books like I am now. And she said, well, imagine every time someone buys a book, a tree gets planted. And I remember saying, and this was a huge moment, I said to her, Masami, can I be your mentor for the rest of your life? And eventually she agreed to that. And so these last, 13, 14 years have just been an amazing journey because we didn't know how to do that. It sounded such a simple idea, but we didn't know how to do it. And it took 3 years to figure out how to do it. And here we are today in 2021 with, a big movement of some 3,000 plus businesses around the world, business leaders there, and creating close to today 235 million giving impacts, and wow. and loving every moment of it, and linking it to everything we do. So for example, just because we are on this call right now, and I'm not the only one doing this, but just as a simple example, as a result of you and I being on this call, 11 kids are getting access to game-changing education just because we're on this call. So the magic of Buy1Give1 is being able to link the little tiny things that we do to really amazing things that are happening in the world. So I have, I have this this great life, seeing the impacts of that every day, and helping business owners and their teams create, and the leaders in those organizations create more impacts in their business and in our world than they previously could have imagined. So I'm not going to swap my job with anybody yet.
I love it, Paul.
Really cool.
Well, this is so inspiring. And to be honest, honestly, until recently, as you were recommended as one of those great leaders that makes a profound impact, we didn't even know of you. So we're so pleased to hear. So tell us, how could we accelerate that movement and expand it, even scale it even further? It's already significant. That's what you just did of 3,000. And how I'm just thinking for those business owners that are listening, what could they do? Like you said, you also love small things, and so
lots of small things. Well, I guess the simple answer to that, Marian, is that just go look at buy1give1.com and you'll see a whole host of things. But I think it's interesting. You use the word accelerate just then, and I think what is really, really interesting about now, as hopefully we come through. Well, we are going to come through this thing, the pandemic, and without wishing to minimize some of the awful things that have occurred and continue to occur as a result of that. One of the things that I've found, and I'm sure you've been the same, that it has really accelerated a lot of things that we kind of knew. Let me give you for example. If you think, well, actually, let's go right back to March last year, and there were some interesting things happening. All of a sudden, we were in this place where we had never been before. But as you know, and indeed everybody listening to us now, there were so many different kind of responses. And I think when you look at those responses, you learn some, as you always do, some really interesting lessons. And so very quickly, I kind of decoded 3 of them. And the first one was where you go into, like flight or fright. It's like panic. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And what happens is, in some cases, you literally freeze. You literally freeze, and that's not a good thing. So that was one, because that's a downward spiral that sadly accelerates. The other, the second sort of group of leaders that I saw were those leaders who were, well, everything will be okay. We'll just kind of bob along. So they're sort of floating on the surface, and so up and down. And so if you looked at them sort of at the beginning of that, and you looked at where they are now, they're exactly the same place. Nothing has changed, right? They're up there. But there were those leaders, the great leaders, the leaders who really care. And what they were on was this sort of upward projection. And I think that the reason for that was that, I think it was Stephen Covey way back when in 7 Habits who looked at this whole sort of function of the North Star, this thing that drives us, if you will, this thing that is bigger than ourselves. And I think all great leaders have this thing that is bigger than ourselves. They don't look inward, they're looking outward, right, all the time. And once you have that, it just drives you every second, every day, and in every way. And as a result of that being on purpose, we see just amazing things happening in an accelerated way. And I think one of the great things about the pandemic is that it's accelerated things that we kind of knew. We all knew it, but we never expressed it. And we never really acted as if we understood it. And that simple thing is that we are all connected. We're all connected. There's no way we can avoid that. And we've seen that now. And so where I think the great leaders always were was that it was never about me, never about me, if you will, as the leader. It was always about we. Yes, it was about the value that we bring, but more importantly, it was about values. Right? And I think we've really seen an acceleration, and we've had so many examples now of where that's happening. So I think that, I'm hopeful that as a result of this, we can be inspired by all of those stories and realize, that in many cases I hear people saying things like, well, maybe we need to get back on track. I think the great leaders were using that time, and the caring leaders were using that time to be able to ask a different question. And the different question was, well, were we actually on the right track? Is there kind of like a better track, if you will, that we could be on? And that is like super inspiring, I think, for me to be a part of, and to be able to hang out with people like you and share these stories and these things that just become a part of who we are. Interestingly, anyway, let me stop for a minute, because otherwise it'll be all about me.
No, I'd love to hear. I just enjoy listening to you, and just keep going. I think I'd love to hear really some of those insights, because this is what you mentioned, and some of those leaders that you had access to has been amazing for the audience to hear and listen. So please go ahead, and I have quite a few questions which I will ask you as well, but just keep going. That's fine.
Oh, well, okay, because it was so interesting when I got your invitation, right? And it said, leaders who care. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because Marian doesn't know what we have in the B1G1 office. Not that we can get into the B1G1 office these days here in Singapore. But ever since we started way back in 2007, we've had what many people, I guess, would be familiar with the work of Vern Harnish and scaling up and all those sorts of things. And one of the things that Vern talks about frequently is this huddle, where you get together like for 10 minutes at an oddball time, and we do that every morning. What's interesting is our huddle has the following acronym. The huddle since 2007 has said, do care. That's what it is. Seriously, I'm not making that up. Didn't do it just for the program. It says, do care. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's the right synchronicity, right? And so, and those do care values that we have stand for something. So see if I can go through it. One is desire to improve. So we want always to not rest on our laurels. Yeah. We want to be open, that's the O, open-mindedness, so that we're never kind of defensive, but we're welcoming the new ideas. That takes the C, by the way, which is called courage, to tackle those difficult tasks. And then there's another one, that the A of the care stands for accountability, that we want to be able to make promises and then keep those promises, and to be full of responsibility to make that happen, never play the victim. The R stands for respect, just for not judgment, but respect for others and where they're at and their values, so that we can find the best solutions, the best ways to work together. And the final one is an interesting one, because I think it's really why we're here in some ways. And it's the E, obviously, of the CARE, and that is enjoyment. And it is to find ways to enjoy every task. And that is really, that is really at the center, isn't it, of well, I was going to say it's at the center. I think, I'm one of the thrills of doing what I do is that, as you mentioned, I get to interact with a fair few people, and some of the people I interact with have done, I've done 4, and very privileged to do 4 TEDx talks. And so when you do that, you get to meet with the gurus who do the TED talks. And I always remember meeting with Brene Brown,
Mm-hmm.
who I'm sure many of our listeners would know. And she is just a ball of fun. And I remember her first TED talk, which is all about vulnerability, which is really important now. And there was this moment in this talk where everything was fun and so on and so forth. And then she sort of got, I think it from memory, Marian, it's about the 6.5 minute point where she goes quiet. And she is talking about way back then, whenever that was, 2015, something like that. She was talking about mental health issues, and particularly mental health issues in teenage boys. And there was this acceleration of them sadly checking out. And she made this comment. She said, "Connection is why we're here." And then she said, "It's what brings meaning and purpose to our lives." And I remember when she said that, I thought, oh, you could say that the other way around. You could say meaning and purpose brings connection, right? So it's one of those lovely sort of virtuous circles, right? With joy right at the middle of it. So and that's one of the reasons why, as I said to you just as we were getting ready for the recording, I said, I had to cancel some things today, and you say, oh, you shouldn't have. Of course I should have canceled them, because I was so looking forward to hanging out with you and being able to share some of these thoughts. So again, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to do that.
Oh, Paul, thank you for sharing these amazing stories, and really what an impact you're creating. And I'm sure you had a number of challenges that worked out, because often people see where you are today, but they don't know, if they've not been by your side or shared a lot of those moments with you, they wouldn't know what you had to go through. And I'm sure there has been a lot of difficult moments. And what would you say was one of the some of the most difficult ones you had to face?
Well, I think one of the most difficult ones recently, although I must say I have, I remember once I was, I think it was about 10 years ago, and a friend of mine was doing a program, and it was one of the first programs he'd ever done. And he asked me if I would be in the audience, and I, to support him. And I said, yeah, of course I would. So anyway, he's doing this thing, and he said, now it's important for us to talk about failure. And I went, oh my goodness. And I had this feeling that he was going to pick on me, right? And he did. And he said, oh, look, guess who's in the audience? Paul Dunn. And I know that Paul said all these things. And oh, wow, he'd love to talk. And I'm shaking my head. I said, no, don't do this. I'm here to support you. I don't want to get out the front. And he said, oh, look, Paul's just waiting for applause or something. I'm not waiting for applause. Anyway, he kind of dragged me out to the front, literally. And he said, so, Paul, what's your view on failure? And when I looked at the video that he prepared after that, the moment he asked or said that word failure, I actually started moving away from him, and until I was up against this wall. I'm like 10 foot away from him having this conversation. And he said, what's going on? And I said, well, I've never realized it before, but my brain is just not allowing me to compute that, that sort of failure thing, because I tend to look at it as, and I know this sounds like a cliche, and it's not meant to be a cliche, but it's just, hey, that didn't work out. So that was a learning experience, and hopefully I can take that on board and move forward very quickly. Mind you, there is one that's occurred recently that is, I think, instructional, and it's actually quite tough. B1G1 has been doing its thing, and in a sense, B1G1 is this kind of child, if you will, or at least was, of mine that starts to grow into maturity. And so one of the things you as a parent, if you will, just to follow that analogy, have to do is to learn to let go, to let it have its head, as it were, so that the teenager has to have the experiences that hopefully you've created good values and they can have those experiences. I've got to tell you, when that, and you would have had the experience as well, when you decide to do that with a company, it's tough. It is really, really tough to get out the way. It really is. But it's also very instructional, because you realize, when you're in this leadership position, you can fool yourself into believing it's all about you. You're the inspirational leader, right? You can fool yourself, right? And so then when it's time to let go, you go, oh my God, can they do it? Can they do it? And so you want to almost kind of creep back and say, have you sort of thought about this? And have you thought about that? So that's been really an interesting time for me. But I think I'm sort of through it now, I think.
It's interesting what you say about failure. Failure doesn't exist. It's, I guess, if you fail on Monday, you may make it on Wednesday. So it's like, it depends how you perceive it. And it's a learning experience. It means if something didn't work out, I guess you could, it's not the end game, right? It's not, you're not going to die, out of it.
And I don't want to make that sound as though, I'm going through life like, oh, life is a bowl of cherries or something, because I don't want to make it sound as though, I never have those times when I go, oh gosh, of course I have those times. And being a guy, what guys typically do when they have those moments, they kind of disconnect. And I think the women listening to us now would say, yeah, we can relate to that. They go into their cave and they sort of switch off and so on and so forth. And actually about a week ago, something happened and I was in that. And I called a friend, funnily enough, in the United Kingdom. And he said, I said, I'm in this spot. I'm just feeling like. And he said, well, you know how to get out of that. And I said, well, remind me, right? And then the guy said, just be with yourself, right? And I said, Wayne, I said, I've actually tried that. That's not working too well at the moment. And then something flipped in my head. And I realized that the thing that was missing at that point, A, I was thinking about me, B, I was feeling sorry for me. And the thing that had gone missing in my life in that disconnect time was a word that you'd mentioned before. And it's that simple thing of gratitude, And when you come from that place and you realize that is the starting place, and here in Singapore, for example, I'm looking out right now to a forest in my work from home office, and people go, "Oh, really? There's forest in Singapore? I thought it was all buildings." No, there's forest, and I know there's forest there because I run around them every morning, and right out just in between where I am and the forest, there's a bus stop, and here in Singapore, the public transport is like amazing. And the bus is literally, the bus, if there's not one every 2 minutes, someone's late. It's like amazing. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was actually doing it before, but more so in the pandemic, because those guys in the taxis and in the in the buses, they were really on the front line, weren't they? Just keeping things going. And so I would get on the bus, the bus stop down in front of us. And the first thing I would do, we all got these little cards where you put it up against the card ring and it goes ping. And as it was doing that, I would look at the driver and I would say, "Thank you for stopping." They would look at me as if I was crazy, because that's, after all, what they're supposed to do, right? But then I realized that we don't do that often enough. We really don't do that often enough. And so, it's just taking time to get into that gratitude thing. And interestingly, and I think this is another thing for leaders, oftentimes, particularly, and in fact, the real title of leaders who care, there's something really interesting about that title. See, let's imagine you disconnect for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason you're feeling, whatever. Then frequently, and I'm not a head shrinker or anything like that, but frequently I think the advice that you get is go look inside, go inside and sort of look, what's going on. And I understand that, but I think a better way, particularly now, is not to go inside at all, but to look outside. Because when you look outside, you could not look outside and be amazed at what you see and grateful for where you are, right? And also when you look outside, to go back to that point I was making about Stephen Covey earlier on, you will see things. You go, you know what? That's something that I can impact on. It's and you'll see things that are bigger than yourself that you can move towards. And one of the things that I talk about in relation to that, I think that there are so many companies that we could look at who, in a sense, are and please, no one be offended by this, but who, in a sense, are kind of like ordinary. They're sort of hiding their light below a bushel, or if you imagine a sea and there's an iceberg, they're kind of like below the waterline, if you will. They're in like a sea of sameness is what I call it. And so if you think about it, instead of calling it ordinary, if you call it standard, then what happens to leaders who care? What leaders who care do is they can take standard things and make them stand out things. They really can do that. And how do they do that? If you think about it, and there's a lovely alliteration where you go from standard to stand out because you stand for something which is bigger than yourself. And that's and then part of that, I was on a run the other day and I thought, that's I was thinking, I'm not sure where you do your thinking, Marian, but sometimes when I'm on, what it's like on a run, that's, or sometimes in the bath, I suppose, or whatever. Not that I shower, not bath, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. Some people get it in the shower, some people get it when they're walking, whatever. And
driving, some people driving.
Well, there you go. Yeah, you probably get it that way. And so for me, it's running. And I was thinking about that whole thing. I was thinking, standard to stand out because you stand for. And then I wanted like an action word. And you might say that stand for is action. But one of the things that just occurred to me that day for some reason was this phrase, impact driven. And the reason I love impact driven is because we can measure the impact that we're having. Yeah. And I know right now that there are companies with whom I'm very privileged to work who they don't do the traditional thing as leaders. They the traditional thing is, okay, so let's sit down, let's do the budgets and let's do all of those sorts of things, and let's see what the next sprint is going to be, all of those sorts of things. And frequently those things are, the way we measure them is we measure them by the revenue. What revenue are we going to hit? All of that sort of stuff. What if we change that? And what if we said, how many people are we planning to impact? What if we just made that subtle shift, but all important shift? And then we could, talk about being impact driven. The fun I have with that, by the way, is I often imagine, people going into so-called network meetings, and they imagine meeting an accountant. And if there's any accountants listening, this is not meant, a derogatory comment to you, but I feel okay because I work with a lot of accountants doing it. So sometimes, you imagine you're at this thing and you say to this person, well, what is it you do? And the person might say, well, I'm an accountant. And frequently, when you hang around these things, you find people going, oh, well, I do need to go to the toilet just for a moment. I'll be back, right? They don't want to hang out with that. But imagine you said, instead of that, imagine you said, someone says, what do you do? And the accountant says, well, I'm actually an impact-driven accountant. So straight away you can say, oh, what's that? Well, what we are is we are driven by the impacts that we are privileged to make with the people that we serve. And that's how we measure what we do. And at the same time, we happen to make a great difference in our world as well. Oh my goodness, tell me more. I'm going to have a conversation with you about that. Does that make sense?
No, I love it. It's so much, and also articulating, saying like, you could say, something like impact driven and help business owners have a better sleep. To be honest, that to me sounds also interesting. They say, well, how do you do that? Because a lot of business owners, do think in their dreams and sleep, in that. So thank you for sharing that little thing, subtle, but it's so important, and also as you start sharing that, you start to implement it inwards, inside of your organization.
So true, so true, and that's all about. I think one of the other things that leaders understand, leaders who care, they really do understand the little things. Like, for example, they understand the simple little power, incredible power of words, right? So, and let me just think of one. So for example, imagine that someone was going on an appointment today and they got there late, right? The first thing most people would say is, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm late. There was an accident on the thing and everything else," right? We would say that, normally say that. But what if we just changed it around and we said, "Thank you so much for your patience. Actually something happened on the way. Do you see? I've just changed it up that little bit." So words, I find, have so much power, and to really to really change where people are at. And I think that the great leaders understand the power of those words to inspire. In fact, I heard a friend of mine put it this way, let's see, about 3 or 4 years ago. He said, he was talking about the same thing, and he said, he said when he was talking about leadership and vision and mission and all of those sorts of things that leaders are supposed to be good at. And he put it this way, he said, when your vision is more powerful than your memory, then your future becomes more powerful than your past. And that's just isn't that a beautiful sequence of words that just, captures
We have some masterpieces today, to be honest. I love really standard, these leaders who care, they standard companies or something standard, and they actually move them, to something that it stand out because of what they stand for. I love that. Just what you just said here was one of the masterpieces. And what you just said about, when your vision is more powerful than your past, your future,
than your memory, than your memory, your future.
It's just so impactful. And I guess one great advice that's coming out of this, guys, is to learn the power of words, to listen to stories, share stories, be able to articulate a story, and even in what we do, think about profoundly of what you do. How do you care about what you do? Starting with those small things, and even when you present what you do, share with that compassion. And you've answered a lot of questions. We're going to say, how do you take care of yourself? And you shared a lot of those things about being gratitude. You just give an example how you came out of that difficult moment, and thank you for doing that, because many people, regardless of what level where they are in the world, do struggle, do find these things. And I found, Paul, that when difficult situations come in, your creativity goes out of the window. So it's like and then when your creativity is down, so the first thing I tend to do is, how can I get back up my creativity and inspiration? Because when I'm creative, I will figure out many solutions. So
You
I
got
have
it.
that
You're
power.
absolutely 1,000% correct. Yeah.
You know, so I was just thinking of that, and you know, and that comes with several different things: excitement, like going in your cave or do things you love. You got to know yourself of what you like to do, which may be, you know, which is coming to the point. If you had no limit at this moment in time, what would you do to excite you? Which is my next question. What excites you, Paul, at this moment in time of you've done so much, you've been so, you know, but I'm sure there are things that excite you at this moment of life.
Oh, yeah, like I had an experience just literally an hour before we got on, and I wasn't thinking about this at this point. And the experience, it involves the watch that I'm wearing, as you can see, is an Apple Watch, and it's not a plug, by the way. But what happened is because of my running, and then something went wrong with the watch, and so I went down to the Genius Bar, and they said, "Oh, the best way to do that is to allow us to ship you a new one, so you can keep this one, you can do the running, and the new one will be with you in 2 days." And sure enough, just an hour ago, the new one turns up, and you go through the instructions. They give you a little bag to send the old one back. And I'm sitting there, and this whole thing about pairing your watch and everything else. And so I just press the pair button on my phone, and I'm looking at my watch, and all of a sudden, everything that I've ever done on my watch and on my iPhone is there on my watch, right? And I'm going, how on earth do we do that, right? How is it possible? I mean, think about, and so those things just excite me that we can be doing this, for goodness sake. And we can be here, we can be sitting comfortably in our offices, and somehow or other that's all getting translated digitally, and all of that sort of stuff. Or we can get our iPhones and we can zip like that, and the pixels all move up. How on earth does that happen? And then I think about that, and just the other day I was actually, that's just amazing that we can do that. And then I remember the moment actually, and I was thinking about that, and then I thought, and I was talking to someone at the time, and said, "Look at that, that's amazing." And then I thought, how amazing is it that I can actually say, without even thinking how to form the words, "Look at that, that's amazing." I mean, how on earth does that happen? Right? So when when you take it all in, and by the way, I think that one of the dangers sometimes, or one of the things that came out actually from something that you said, is that think about the whole thing, right? Think about leaders who care. Now, does that mean that they care for themselves? Of course. They have to be in the best sort of physical health and all of that sort of thing, so that they can do that. But what is it? What's the missing phrase on there? It's leaders who care for those they're privileged to serve, right? And to always have that focus on the impact that just your very presence, your very words, if you will, can have on those people that you interact with every day. I mean, how could there be anything more privileged than that? So those are the things that keep me excited.
Thank you. What a great way, to share that, Paul. And just to wrap it up and look at it in the big picture, so many other questions, of course, but I think we'll probably need another session, on with you, and certainly longer, a panel in that sense. But talking about scalability and impact, we have a question here as well, that will be a way to maybe wrap it up, from Stoyan. And he says, "Paul, what an incredible positive impact you have done. What did really takes to scale the impact on such a global level? Can you share some successful strategies that have worked for you? In other words, we're thinking for a better future. What can we
Sure.
do to spread the care culture and this positive impact, as you mentioned earlier, because we can measure it with the people and lives we affect, and that links up to privilege to be able to serve?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for the question, Sohan. I think the thing that I see more and more and more is this critical understanding that it sort of starts with almost a negative thing. But so let me go with that. Then we'll move. That, and here's the sort of negative thing. We just need to realize that we're designed almost not to do this alone. You know, we just cannot do these great things alone. What we have to do is we have to connect. We have to build partnerships. We have to build relationships. And we all feel better when we do that, right? So
Yeah.
So I mean, it's great that you attribute some of the success of B1G1 to that initial thought. But the reality is, I mean, the reality is that it's those people that are members that are going out there and saying having on the bottom of their emails things that said, just because I sent you this email, a child got access to water, or whatever it is they're doing in their day-to-day lives, which are just inspiring them and as a result inspiring others. So I think it's a matter of really making sure that you can be this place which is not necessarily where you're going out and spruiking and telling people how great you are, but just being in this place where you become this magnet, this magnet for talent and so on. Because the reality is that we simply cannot do it alone. We really cannot.
Love it. And Paul, sincerely, thank you so much for being with us today and making the time. What can I say? God bless you and your family, and keep spreading the goodness of the world. And sincerely, you've made us such a great, some of the masterpieces I've heard and phrases from your experiences you shared today certainly will be echoed and remembered throughout and shared with so many others. So sincerely, thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today.
And well, thank you. And of course, everybody listening to us now would know that would not have happened were it not for your vision in creating leaders who care. So congratulations for that. And thank you so much for having me here. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you, Paul.